The movie begins with a high school student named Darin, who wakes up at 6 a.m. to go for a run. In the middle of his run, Darin gets caught up in a song and starts rapping along with it. Suddenly, he realizes he's late and rushes back home. When he arrives, he tells his father that he was 30 seconds late and that his route took longer than usual today. So, his father tells him to run again to make up for the lost time and complete the route in less time. Darin picks up his watch and starts running again. Unlike many fathers, Darin's dad is determined to make sure his son gets into Harvard University, carefully planning every day and even Darin's long-term future. One morning, Darin's friends, Kieran and Sammy, excitedly tell him that a concert by the famous American rapper Big Sean, whom Darin is a huge fan of, is happening nearby. At first, Darin is thrilled to hear the news, but then he realizes he needs to finish his college application, so he decides he can't go to the concert. However, that night, Darin completes his application earlier than expected and asks his dad for permission to go to the concert with his friends. His dad initially wants to refuse, but Darin's mom interrupts and tells him he can go, as long as he returns home by 11 p.m. Later, Darin and his friends arrive at the concert venue, but when they see the huge crowd, his friends suggest sneaking in through the back entrance to find a better spot. Luckily, Darin finds a broken fence, and they slip through. They manage to avoid the guards, but when they reach the back door, they discover it's locked. At that moment, Darin notices a girl with turquoise hair walking on the upper floor. He calls out to her and makes up a story to convince her to let them upstairs. But the girl tells them they each have to pay $50 for her to help them get in. Darin tries to bargain, but the girl points to his expensive shoes and says he can afford it. Before Darin can respond, the guards show up and order them to leave the area. While the guards are distracted, the girl takes the opportunity to jump down and run toward the exit. Darin calls after her, asking her name, and she replies, Isabelle. That night, Darin obsessively searches for Isabelle's social media profiles, but can't find anything. The next morning, Darin goes out for his usual run and, by chance, spots Isabelle working at an ice cream shop. He quickly calls his friends, and they all head to the shop. They walk in, and Darin starts talking to Isabelle, trying to order ice cream. Isabelle recognizes him with surprise, but doesn't show much interest. Kieran then orders ice cream for all three of them. When Darin tries to pay and drop the change in the tip jar, Isabelle steps in and says that, according to store rules, if the staff receives a tip, they have to sing for the customer. Amused, Darin drops the money into the jar, and Isabelle and her co-workers sing for them. Darin tries to tip again, but this time Isabelle gets annoyed and tries to leave the shop. However, Darin starts rapping for her, even working a request for a date into his freestyle. Isabelle, surprised by Darin's actual rap talent, eventually agrees to let him walk her home after her shift. When her shift ends, Isabelle steps outside and sees Darin waiting for her in front of his expensive car. Isabelle reminds Darin that she lives in a poor neighborhood, where bringing his car is practically an invitation for thieves. Darin decides to leave his car behind and starts walking with her. He tries to start a conversation and asks Isabelle which school she goes to. Isabelle replies that she doesn't go to school. Although Darin had always heard that not going to school was illegal, he decides not to press the issue. In that instant, a man named Phil shows up and reminds Isabelle that there's leftover food at home for her. After Phil leaves, Darin asks Isabelle if he's her father, but she explains that her mother abandoned her when she was a baby and she's never met her father. Phil used to be her babysitter, and when Isabelle was left alone, he decided to take care of her. When they finally reach Isabelle's house, she doesn't even invite Darin inside, but she agrees to go out with him again sometime. The next day, while Darin is having breakfast, his father tells him that the family has been invited to a party where one of the Harvard board members will be present. Darin says he already made plans for the weekend and asks his mom to back him up, but she sides with his father and reminds Darin that he must be at the party by 9 p.m. Because of this, Darin decides to move his date with Isabelle earlier and picks her up from work. Isabelle quickly notices that Darin is upset and asks what happened. Darin confesses that his parents are forcing him to go to a party he doesn't want to attend. Isabelle tries to lift his mood and suggests they skip the fancy restaurant and try street food instead. She convinces Darin to give street food a chance and asks him to talk more about himself. Darin starts listing his achievements, but Isabelle isn't impressed. She asks him what he truly wants for himself, because everything he mentions sounds like his parents' expectations, not his own dreams. Caught up in the conversation, Darin loses track of time and arrives late to the party. His father is furious and reminds him not to embarrass the family. As time passes, Darin and Isabelle grow closer, and their dates become more frequent. Darin helps Isabelle momentarily forget her struggles, while Isabelle helps Darin realize that chasing his father's dreams might not be what he truly wants. One day, while they're out together, Darin's father spots them. In the next scene, Darin returns home, and his father confronts him about Isabelle. When Darin doesn't give a clear answer, his father demands that he end his relationship with her, convinced she's a bad influence. For the first time, Darin decides not to obey his father. He continues seeing Isabelle, and one night, after walking her home, he insists on going inside. Inside Isabelle's room, Darin notices one wall covered in postcards. When he asks about them, Isabelle explains that her mother sends her a postcard for every birthday and Christmas. Darin wants to say something, but Isabelle suddenly hugs him tightly. The moment is short-lived, though, as Isabelle grows anxious, pushes Darin away and apologizes. She says she made a mistake and asks him to leave. Isabelle's reaction leaves Darin heartbroken. He tells her he loves her and doesn't understand why, after all their time together, she's pushing him away. Isabelle tries to brush it off and tells Darin that they can only be friends. But when Darin insists, Isabelle takes off her wig and reveals that she has cancer and only 1 year left to live. This truth shocks Darin, and he freezes, unable to respond. Isabelle, thinking Darin is rejecting her, pushes him out of the house and breaks down in tears. The next morning, Darin's friends take him to a rooftop to help him vent his anger and sadness by shouting into the sky. Later that day, Darin's father approaches him and reassures him that if he sticks to their plan, he'll soon receive his acceptance letter from Harvard. This sparks something in Darin's mind, and he rushes to Isabelle's house. Darin shows up at her door with a bouquet of roses, begging her to open the door. He tells Isabelle that he loves her and wants to help her live the best life possible in the years she has left. In that instant, Phil arrives, overhears Darin's words, and smiles with joy for them. After minutes of pleading, Isabelle finally opens the door and agrees to Darin's idea, but with one condition. Darin must never tell her he loves her again, because she believes love is a complicated feeling that people overuse. In the days that follow, Darin makes a plan for them to experience all of life's major moments together within the year. Their first goal is to buy a house. Darin pretends to be a millionaire rapper, and Isabelle plays the role of his girlfriend. They joke around, but when Isabelle asks Darin to rap in front of everyone, he freezes. Isabelle grabs his hand, and they run away together, laughing. Next, they celebrate multiple birthdays to make up for the ones Isabelle will miss in the future. Darin even bakes mini cakes with Phil's help. Though they don't taste great, Isabelle enjoys every joyful moment. They also hold a symbolic graduation ceremony, dressing up in caps and gowns as if they were finishing school. Darin even accompanies Isabelle to her chemotherapy sessions. During one session, Isabelle talks about a man named Simon who has prostate cancer and jokes that they've made a bet on who will die first. This upsets Darin, and he asks her not to joke about death. One day, Isabelle takes Darin to meet a man named Ron, a music producer. She encourages Darin to rap and record a demo. At first, Darin feels awkward and can't perform, but when Isabelle teases him about always following his dad's plan, something clicks. He suddenly gains confidence and starts rapping. His lyrics move both Isabelle and Ron, who gives Darin a copy of the demo. When Darin gets home, he listens to the demo on repeat, daydreaming about a new career path. They check off their goals one by one, until it's time for the proposal. Darin takes Isabelle on a romantic date, but when he proposes, Isabelle breaks down and rejects him. The moment only reminds her of the future she'll never have. Days pass, and Isabelle's health deteriorates. Eventually, Darin invites her to Christmas dinner to meet his parents. On the night of the party, Isabelle arrives with Phil. Darin doesn't get a chance to warn his father about Phil's presence, but to his surprise, his dad welcomes both of them warmly and with kindness. During dinner, things get worse when Isabelle argues with Darin's father, saying that school shouldn't be the center of everyone's life. Darin's father, angered by what he sees as disrespect, insults Isabelle and says that girls like her have no future. Exhausted by the disrespect, Phil and Isabelle decide to leave, but Darin stays silent and doesn't defend her. Heartbroken, Isabelle stops talking to him, though Darin quietly watches over her from a distance. Meanwhile, Darin meets with Harvard officials to secure his acceptance, but when one of them asks him to talk about himself, he remembers Isabelle's words. In a moment of clarity, he admits that getting into Harvard no longer matters to him. At home, Darin has a heated argument with his father, who angrily claims that Darin has ruined his future. For the first time, Darin yells back, smashing the whiteboard filled with his father's plans. He tells his father that none of those plans were his own dreams. They were his father's. His father, furious, raises a hand to hit him, but Darin's mother steps in at the last moment to stop him. After Darin storms out of the room, his mother tells his father that she won't support anything that risks them losing their son. Darin rushes to see Isabelle and apologizes for not defending her. Eventually, Isabelle forgives him, and they reconcile. The next day, they go on a spontaneous road trip. Darin steals snacks from a gas station, and they head to San Francisco. There, Darin raps on the street with Isabelle's encouragement. They even attend a Big Sean concert, and Isabelle urges Darin to give him his demo. But just as Darin works up the courage, another fan interrupts, and the chance slips away. On the drive back to their motel, Isabelle starts feeling unwell but hides her pain and falls asleep in the car. When she wakes up, she finds they've stopped in front of her mother's house. Darin encourages her to make peace with her mom. Isabelle steps out of the car and sees her mother with her new family. Heartbroken, she returns to the car, has a panic attack, and starts hyperventilating. Darin loses focus, and they crash. Isabelle stumbles out of the car in a panic, then collapses. When she wakes up, she's back in her home, with a doctor telling Phil and Darin that her cancer has rapidly advanced, and all they can do now is manage her pain. Darin spends every moment with Isabelle, caring for her day and night. One evening, he falls asleep by her bed, only to wake up to his mother telling Phil he needs to rest and let her take care of Isabelle. Instead of hanging out with his friends, Darin heads to Ron's studio and records a song for Isabelle. But when he returns to her house that night, he finds her unconscious on the floor. Panicking, he rushes her to the hospital, but the doctor says there's nothing more they can do. Devastated, Darin breaks down in tears, and his mother comforts him. Forced to face the harsh reality, Darin contacts Isabelle's mother one last time. That night, her mother visits, holds Isabelle in her arms, and explains why she left. Isabelle forgives her mother but asks her not to come back, saying that some wounds never heal, and she doesn't want to relive that pain. A few days later, while Darin is out, Isabelle discovers the song he recorded for her. Crying, she listens to it, realizing how deeply he loves her. Meanwhile, Darin's father finds the demo in his room, listens to it, and finally recognizes his son's true talent. With the help of Darin's friends, Isabelle plans one last surprise. They bring Darin to Phil's club, dress him in a tux, and place him at the end of the aisle. Moments later, Phil wheels Isabelle toward him, and in a small, intimate ceremony, they get married. That night, Isabelle peacefully passes away in her sleep, next to Darin. At her funeral, Darin's father shows up and apologizes for everything he's done. Months later, Darin moves to New York to pursue his music dreams. As he drives, he turns on the radio and is shocked to hear his demo playing. Isabelle had sent it to a station before she died. And the film ends there. I hope you enjoyed this introduction. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give me your support with likes and comments.